Law of Attraction Talk Radio. Get ready to be the best you can be. Stay tuned for the Law of Attraction Talk Radio with Jules.
Well, good evening. Welcome back to the Law of Attraction Talk Radio. I'm Jules from beautiful, clean, and refreshing Southern California, and I am so tickled that you could join us tonight, either live or by download, because tonight we are going to be talking about death, and in particular about near-death experiences and after-death communications with Dr. Jeffrey Long, who is a practicing radiation oncologist in Gallup, New Mexico. You know, when I started this show about 17 months ago, I really wanted to keep the focus on scientific aspects surrounding the universal law of attraction. But during this time, some amazing things happened. As Greg Braden mentioned to me, science is now married to metaphysics and spirituality. Although we know some scientists are still dragging their feet on this idea of the fourth and fifth dimensions surrounding consciousness, it is extremely hard for me to find guests that do not reflect this marriage. In other words, metaphysics and spirituality subjects that have been around for thousands of years are now being scientifically documented. That is why this show is now dealing with issues of angels, channeling, indigo children, collective consciousness, and even retro intention, as written by Lynn McTaggart. If ever there's a time in history to have an open mind, this is it. And that is why I am so thrilled to have Dr. Jeff on the show tonight. We're going to be talking about a taboo subject that creates fear and sadness, which is known as death. But I think it will be a turning point in the subject to be one of love and peace and acceptance that death perhaps does not really exist. It's simply another phase of living. So, I am so thrilled to bring Dr. Jeffrey Long, who founded the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation and After-Death Communication Research Foundation and Out-of-Body Experience Research Foundation. This family of websites is the largest publicly accessible collection of exceptional human experiences of their type available. And even portions of the Near-Death Experience website has been posted in over 20 different foreign languages. This whole effort is leading to increasing awareness worldwide and across cultural boundaries. We all share these types of experiences, and they are similar to a degree that is medically inexplicable. The potential to heighten world understanding is obvious and extremely, extremely important. Dr. Jeff, I'm so thrilled you are with us tonight.
Well, Jules, it's a real pleasure for me to be here tonight with you also. As you said earlier, this is certainly going to be a very interesting, exciting show. We certainly have a lot to talk about. The fear and sadness that you said that's been surrounding death. I think we're popping that bubble of illusion through the websites and our worldwide outreach.
Isn't that wonderful? And all I can say is wow, because I think this is absolutely wonderful. But I can imagine that you've created quite a stir in the medical community with all this. How are the physicians reacting to this information?
You know, it's interesting. The substantial majority of physicians at this point in time still do not accept that near-death experiences are medically inexplicable. Now, that's not based on their review of the literature or their careful consideration of arguments pros and cons. It's just simply based on the fact that they can't conceive that it's possible. Now, the interesting thing is when I sit down with physicians one-on-one or to a small group and they find out that this is the research area that I'm involved with and we start talking about some of the evidence, the substantial majority of physicians will say, oh, wow, that's interesting. I get it. There really is evidence justifying the reality of near-death experiences. It's really not one of these, woo-woo things or things that is that a lot of people believe in without a lot of evidence behind it. And actually, the substantial majority of physicians, at least when I'm talking with them, come to accept the reality of near-death experience. It's all based on the evidence, Jules, and that's what our websites and research effort have been so focused on and so much about.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we all know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a marvelous MD who has died, but she was known for the 5 stages of grieving. Dr. Ross came to the conclusion that death does not exist either. Did you come up with the same conclusion in your research?
Yeah, there's no question about that in my mind. Understand, I guess for the sake of assume your listeners, most of them will know what a near-death experience it is, but just in the event that some don't, what I'm talking about here is studying experiences where people basically die. They may clinically die, their heart stops, or at least they're so severely physically compromised from some illness or trauma that they're unconscious. And yet, at this point of unconsciousness, they have a highly detailed, often very lucid experience that, as you mentioned earlier, is similar all around the world. So from my point of view, medically, it's absolutely impossible to have this kind of organized, lucid experience, which is so similar as shared among so many people, at a time when, medically speaking, your unconsciousness, the very definition of unconscious, means no consciousness, no ability to have any type of memory, and yet that's not what our near-death experiences are describing.
Wow. So it really doesn't have to do with the drugs in the brain that are have you found that?
Yeah. If there's really nothing that could account for instance, several of the most evidential parts of near-death experience, about half of them early in the near-death experience, their consciousness separates from the body and is above their physical body most of the time, on the average maybe about 15 feet. And from that vantage point, they can see their unconscious body or often their frantic resuscitation efforts. And this is ongoing while they're unconscious or even clinically dead. And part of the study that I've done is to see how accurate these observations are. We've studied hundreds and hundreds of near-death experiences that involve these types of observations. Now, medically speaking, I would be able to pick up on inaccuracy or false impressions or anything that could account for an unreal observation because of my medical background, and they're in this state so often describing their medical resuscitation procedures. What we're finding is about 97-98% of the time what they see and hear, or they're in that out-of-body state, usually early in the near-death experience, is absolutely accurate with no error whatsoever. And you can't explain that by hypoxia, which means low oxygen levels in the blood, or by brain chemistry, or by any other medical explanation at all. You simply cannot have that type of accurate observations while you're unconscious. It's medically inexplicable.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned the floating up outside the body. Is this what typically happens during near-death experiences? I have a problem. NDEs.
Yeah, we could call them NDE. That's less of a mouthful. I like that, Jules.
Yeah, right. Okay.
During an NDE, it's only about half of the time they actually have that. Now, the other typical elements of an NDE, besides that initial out-of-body experience, people have heard the archetypical traveling through a tunnel. Very often there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel. They may encounter deceased relatives. They may review all or a portion of their prior life experiences. Very often they come to a decision with other beings that they encounter about whether they are going to return to their body, and then they do so. So just in a very quick nutshell, that's the near-death experience elements. Very few near-death experiences have all those elements, and actually most NDEs have only a few of those elements. But by the time you study large numbers of NDEs, and we have on our website, we've studied, believe it or not, 1,600 NDEs.
Wow.
The pattern is extremely clear. These elements occur over and over, and generally in a very consistent order.
And from all over the world, too.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, portions of our website that study NDEs have been translated into over 20 different foreign languages. That's all to the credit of our webmaster, Jody, that's been sort of her second full-time job to do this. But as a result of that, we have more experiences shared from all around the world in first person. In other words, people in non-English speaking countries that share in English, or due to a team of, believe it or not, over 100 volunteer translators, We have people share in their native language, their NDE. We have our volunteers translate it into English, and then we share it back with the world. So as you said earlier, our website is absolutely the largest publicly available collection of NDEs by far, by orders of magnitude actually, than any other source in the world. So we're basing our observation not on wishful thinking or based on what prior research has demonstrated, but this is purely unique research driven by studying the NDEs shared with our website. And it is, exactly as I said, medically inexplicable. There is no explanation for it. Every shred of evidence that we're encountering through these 1,600 NDEs suggests that consciousness, who we are, our very being, survives our physical bodily death, that there is an afterlife, and there's a wonderful afterlife.
To hear the rest of this interview, go to lawofattractiontools.com and click the RSS button.